Thank you so much, everyone, for joining us today for the Gun Sense Candidate Virtual Rally, hosted by the Everytown for Gun Safety Action Fund with Moms Demand Action. I'm Shannon Watts, founder of Moms Demand Action, and I am so thrilled to be joined today by John Feinblatt, the president of Everytown, U.S. Representative Lucy McBath, U.S. Representative Sharice Davids, and former Colorado Governor and current Senate candidate John Hickenlooper. We are so thrilled to have hundreds of volunteers from across the U.S. joining us virtually, many in their signature red shirts, to recognize the gun sense candidates this cycle who have demonstrated that they will govern with gun safety in mind. We want to talk about the epidemic of gun violence, which is exacerbated by an unprecedented pandemic. When I found Moms Demand Action at my kitchen table over 7 years ago, I never imagined this movement would return to being run from kitchen tables, couches, and front porches, as so many of our volunteers are now suddenly and all at once full-time parents, teachers, essential workers, and gun safety activists. Our volunteers continued their commitment to the gun violence prevention movement and now are on the front line of both the corona gun violence crisis and this horrific pandemic. As we all know, it is more important than ever because, I have lost my place here. As we all know, it's more important than ever because this pandemic has increased the risks of domestic violence, suicide, and unintentional shootings. At the same time, many cities are seeing increases in gun violence as many violence intervention workers struggle to do their life-saving work while following social distancing guidelines. And this is why it's so important to elect gun sense candidates in November, not just in the presidential campaign, but at every level of office. So today, we're announcing we've awarded our first slate of gun sense candidate distinctions to more than 700 candidates running for office, from Congress to state legislatures to school boards. And among this slate of candidates receiving the distinction are more than 30 Moms Demand Action volunteers and gun violence survivors running for office. We are so proud to be an incubator for these courageous women and some men who are ready to go from advocating for laws to writing and implementing them. The program we're kicking off today is just one piece of our electoral program this cycle, which also includes spending $60 million to elect candidates and is of course backed by our 6 million supporters and volunteers across the country. We have found a winning formula in combining the data and investment of Everytown for Gun Safety with the grassroots power and strategy of Moms Demand Action. And we have been doing the unglamorous heavy lifting of activism for years, and we're good at it. We've achieved a win rate of over 90% in state houses, and many candidates we back win. This year, Students Demand Action is a force of its own, with a plan to register 100,000 new voters. 7 years ago, I never imagined that lawmakers at all levels of public office would seek out something like the Gun Sense candidate distinction and run on gun safety. But in addition to doing the right thing, it's also good politics. The majority of Americans support gun safety legislation. And on that note, I would like to introduce a woman who has inspired so many Americans to join Moms Demand Action, my friend and my former fellow Moms Demand Action volunteer, Congresswoman Lucy McBath.
Well, thank you, Shannon, so very, very much. And thank you, Governor Hickenlooper and John Feinblatt and my great friend and colleague, Sharice Davids. I am so excited to be on our virtual Everytown rally today. We're doing things a little bit differently, but we're still getting things done. I am Lucy McBath. I am the mother of Jordan Davis, a young man who was shot and killed in the National Law Music killing. And I to be the faith and outreach leader and national spokesperson for Moms Demand Action for Gun Sense in America and Everytown for Gun Safety. That is how I got my start. And I began working with Moms Demand Action in Everytown for Gun Safety. They gave me the ability to really to speak about my tragedy and to talk about our need to have gun safety legislation that works for everyone in our country to keep our families and our communities safe. But I'll tell you, it was not an easy road in the very beginning because I was working through my pain, as many of our survivors do. But that's what really makes the difference. I decided to run for office because I began to recognize that with Everytown for Gun Safety and Moms Demand Action for Gun Sense in America, we were building such a strong and phenomenal movement, grassroots movement on the ground. But after Parkland, I recognized those children, when they were murdered, they were the same age as my son Jordan. And I was really wanting to make sure we were able to move the needle on what was happening in the country with gun safety, and integrating not only the grassroots movement, but also integrating policy, changing legislation to make sure that what happened to me didn't happen to anyone else. In the beginning, people kept telling me, don't run for that seat. You know, you live in a red state in Georgia, you're a woman, and you're running on a policy agenda of gun safety. You will never win. It will not happen. You cannot win. It is political suicide. Not listen to the naysayers. I took everything that I learned with Everytown for Gun Safety and Moms Demand Action for Gun Sense in America, and I put it to use. I put it to use. I used my story. I talked about the story of so many other people like me that do not deserve to have to suffer through these tragedies. I talked about the fact that our communities and our families deserve better, and that our federal government and legislation deserves to protect us so that our children have bright futures. And I won. The fact that I am there, and Sharice Davids and so many more like me that are gun sense champions, that we're winning our seats, is a testament to this is a policy agenda that matters, truly, truly matters. And so I am so excited that I've been able to flip my seat, and I'm so encouraged to be able to help so many more people, gun sense champions, women across the country, flip their seats, because we can do this. We must do this. So I just want to, I'm so excited to see my friends, so excited to be among so many survivors and gun sense champions that are really building this movement. The Federal Extremist Protect of 2019, that is legislation I put forward. That is going to pass. I guarantee you, with our effort, it will pass. H.R. 8, federal background checks for all gun sales. 1112, closing the Charleston loophole. Those are pieces of legislation that my gun sense champion colleagues and I have put forth. Will continue to work. Thank you, Everytown. Thank you, moms, for everything that you do to champion for the families and for our future.
Great. Hello, everybody. Sharice Davids here from the Kansas 3rd Congressional District. First of all, thank you all for all the work that you've done for so long. And also thank you for following our social distancing guidelines and hosting this event virtually. I know a lot of us have been trying to figure out how do we stay connected, stay in touch during this time, and this is certainly one of those ways. You know, my commitment to addressing our gun safety crisis that we're in is a big reason why I'm sitting here today as the representative for Kansas's 3rd District. It's also, I know, one of the reasons that I get to call Lucy McBath one of the fiercest advocates I've ever met, my colleague, and I appreciate so much the work that she has been doing. I know people across the political spectrum, certainly in my district and I think across the country, have been tired of elected officials not doing anything about the crisis that we're seeing. They're tired of politicians who offer condolences but no action. And I think Moms Demand Action, Everytown for Gun Safety, has been doing exactly that. They've been advocating fiercely and helping folks like myself, Congresswoman McBath, soon to be Senator Hickenlooper. And this is one of the ways that we're going to make sure that gun safety is a focal point of federal legislation. And all the way up and down the ballot, we're going to see gun safety legislation getting passed across this country. And it's because of the hard work that so many of you have been doing for so long. You know, in our first 100 days, Congresswoman McBath touched on this. We were able to pass some real gun sense safety measures. And right now we're waiting for Mitch McConnell, frankly, to do his job and get those bills onto the Senate floor so that they can get passed. I've been proud to work alongside my colleagues in trying to make sure that we do things like get universal background checks, close those loopholes in gun purchases. And I know that Congresswoman McBath and I are going to continue to work really hard with each other. And we're also going to continue to help support candidates across the country who are doing everything that they can to make sure that gun safety is a huge part of their platform. During this coronavirus pandemic, I know that we're seeing exactly the things. We're reminded every day that folks are impacted by gun violence in ways that often are not talked about. Until you all started pushing for so many things, I know there were calls nationally, but to see the organization you've done around addressing gun safety and domestic violence, around gun safety and suicide issues during this pandemic, I know that folks have been going out and buying guns, even though that's not what's going to protect them from this pandemic. What's going to protect them is social distancing, which means we're spending more time at home. It's that much more important that our children are kept safe. We're not trying to infringe on people's rights. We're trying to make sure that kids don't accidentally get a hold of a gun that's not being properly stored. We want to make sure that folks who are at risk of harming themselves don't have easy access to a firearm. So I think one of the biggest things that I would say is thank you. Thank you for the advocacy you've been doing. Thank you for the hard work you've been putting in. And with that, I'm actually going to turn it over to John Feinblatt to talk a little bit more about all of the things that we're working toward and that we're hoping to see here in the future. Thanks so much, everyone.
Thank you, Representative Davids, and thank you, Lucy McBath. We are so grateful that both of you joined us today. For those of you who don't know me, I'm John Feinblatt, president of Everytown for Gun Safety. And you know, I didn't think anything could beat the thrill of walking into a state house and seeing a sea of red t-shirts. But seeing all of you here on video, still decked out in red, well, let me tell you, it's pretty damn inspiring. And truth be told, I'm starting to like these video meetings. They're just a little bit more conversational, a little bit more intimate. So in that vein, I'll open up with a confession. Back in 2018, when Everytown launched the Gun Sense candidate program, I said we'd be lucky if 500 candidates applied. And let me tell you why I lowballed it. I've been working on the issue of gun safety for nearly 20 years, and I remember when gun safety was the third rail of American politics. Now, we all know the political calculus has changed a lot since then, and I'm very happy to report that the prediction I made in 2018 was off. In fact, it was way off. That year, in the end, more than 3,000 candidates were awarded the distinction. And once they got it, it showed up everywhere. It showed up on yard signs, on mailers, on TV ads, you name it, which was a smart move because voters were searching for candidates who would fight like hell to keep their families safe. And with your help, we know what happened next. In 2018, we elected a gun sense majority to the U.S. House, as well as gun sense governors and legislators across the country. And then, just 1 year, we elected a gun sense majority in Virginia, which, in case any of you have forgotten it, happens to be the NRA's home state. But all of this was really just a curtain raiser for 2020. As Shannon mentioned, Everytown is putting $60 million into this election, and that's double what the NRA spent for Trump in 2016. Now, all of those politicians who are counting on the NRA to help them out this election cycle should heed this warning. Today's NRA is underwater in opinion polls, under investigation by multiple federal and state agencies, and undergoing layoffs in the face of severe budget shortfalls. But as the NRA stumbles, we have never been stronger. And the latest example is the early success of our Gun Sense candidate program. It's only April, and the nation is grappling with the worst health crisis in a century. But even so, over 700 candidates have already applied for and received our seal of approval. And frankly, that's just a start. We plan to award more than 5,000 distinctions this cycle. But let me share with you some of the remarkable facts about our first round of awardees. It includes candidates running for office up and down the ballot, including attorney generals, governors, and the U.S. House and Senate. It also includes marquee Senate candidates in battleground states like Colorado or Arizona, Iowa, North Carolina, and Maine. And it even includes more than half of all the House candidates running in red to blue districts, which is even further proof that our distinction is seen as a vote getter in the most pivotal contest. And let me tell you, it's no secret why. Savvy politicians know that our volunteers have a long track record of turning out voters. And if today's virtual rally proves anything, it's this. Moms Demand Action volunteers won't let anything stop them. Not shelter-in-place orders, not Donald Trump, and definitely not the NRA. And that brings me to our next speaker, someone who has also taken on the NRA. After the tragic mass shooting in Aurora, Colorado, then Governor John Hickenlooper knew the moment called for action. He also knew the NRA would fight him every step of the way. But unlike many politicians, he didn't let that stop him. Under his leadership, Colorado passed laws to require background checks on all gun sales, limit high-capacity magazines, and make it harder for domestic abusers to get their hands on guns. And now he's running for the U.S. Senate, where he's pledged to continue the fight, and we're going to help him do just that. Governor Hickenlooper, thanks so much for joining us today.
Well, thank you, John and Shannon and representatives. I am honored to be named a gun sense candidate, and Colorado knows too well the devastation of our national gun violence epidemic. I was 2 years into being governor, got a call after midnight back in 2013, and we didn't recognize at that exact moment how horrific that shooting in the Aurora movie theater was. But the next morning, I was on site to see the crime scene video that came out with images so horrific that I will never be free of them. And we recognized that we had to take action. After that experience, and with the help of dedicated advocates in Colorado, we were able to bring a broad cross-section of people together to enact some common sense reforms. It wasn't easy, and there was some serious battles along the way. We went first after the basic, making sure that we got universal background checks for all gun purchases. And of course, that became a huge battle. We had protesters driving around the Capitol week after week, honking their horns. I came home and my son was in the 5th grade, and he asked me what was I complaining about, and I said, well, started to explain it, and he said, Dad, what's so hard about your job? You have to make decisions, get the facts, make a decision, check, next. Anyway, the next day I did go in and I recognized that we hadn't gotten our local statistics. And it took us 4 weeks, and there was a lot of political damage done in those 4 weeks. But I'll never remember those statistics. I'll never forget those statistics, that there were 38 people in 2012 in Colorado who tried to buy guns, and we stopped them. 133 people convicted of sexual assault. In all, 3,000 violent criminals tried to buy guns, and we were able to stop them. And we passed universal background checks. We also passed limits on magazine capacities and made sure that we had a law to get guns out of the hands of domestic abusers. But while we in Colorado were making progress, Washington failed us. Senator Gardner has benefited from nearly $4 million in spending from the NRA, with more of it sure to come this year. And he has a record to show for it. He's opposed closing the terrorist loophole, the boyfriend loophole, the Charleston loophole, the gun show loophole. We might as well call our disastrous gun safety laws the Gardner loophole. And this isn't a partisan issue. There are many independents and Republicans who agree that we need to take common sense steps to keep guns out of the hands of dangerous people. But Senator Gardner has voted again. We voted against the bipartisan Manchin-Toomey bill to expand background checks and require they be done for online sales. When I get to the U.S. Senate, I will work hard to do just what we did here in Colorado, bring people together to finally take action to curb gun violence.
Thank you very much, Governor. Thank you very much, Governor. And now I think we have time for some questions. And I'm going to pose some of the questions that we've been hearing both from our staff and our volunteers. And let me start really with the topic of the day, which is COVID-19. As Shannon mentioned, we're seeing troubling signs that the combination of panic buying, home confinement, and high stress is risking the three types of gun violence: unintentional shootings, domestic violence, and suicide. My question is this: should Congress take steps to address the mounting risks of gun violence in the next stimulus bill? For instance, make sure law enforcement needs to complete every background check in a time of surging gun sales.
Well, it shouldn't take an epidemic, a pandemic, for us to recognize that we need universal background checks. We need to recognize that not only do we need universal background checks, we need to give law enforcement the time they need to fully conduct these checks and to close these loopholes. I mean, we have a challenge in front of us, but this is often the time when the American people are most receptive to common sense. And I think we need to reach out, and I think Congress should put in the resources to make sure that we begin addressing in every town the challenges that we're facing as a result of the pandemic.
Thank you. Governor, you come from a purple state with a long history, actually, of gun ownership, and yet you were successful in pushing through an ambitious slate of gun safety. What's your advice to other purple state lawmakers when it comes to this issue? How do you talk to constituents in a state which has a long history of recreational hunting and shooting and gun ownership?
Well, I think many of the hunters and people that use guns recreationally are on our side, and they want to make sure that we keep guns out of the hands of dangerous people. They want to make sure we do a better job of training gun users of all ages in the appropriate way to handle guns, to store their weapons, and make sure that they're under lock and key, that their teenage children can't get easy access. And there's a whole litany of things we've worked on here that I think would work in any purple state. But it does start with universal background checks. I mean, almost 90% of Republicans support universal background checks. I think we're long overdue to bring that onto the floor of the U.S. Senate, have a robust discussion, and then pass it.
You were the mayor of Denver, and we know that cities are on the front lines of the gun violence crisis. So I'm wondering, harking back to your time as mayor of Denver, what did that teach you about the issue? And are there steps that every mayor should be taking to prevent gun violence in their cities?
Well, certainly mayors are on the front lines, and being a mayor is more granular than being a governor. I've been both. And I think that one of the keys is getting mayors to be able to work with governors and recognize that they have common alliances. And in many cases, the rules and regulations that mayors need are different than what would apply to the entire state. In mayors, we have the real solution to so much of our gun violence, and making sure that we put in place the basic regulatory frameworks that A, keep guns out of the hands of dangerous individuals, B, address issues like domestic violence, increasing levels of suicide, especially among young people, and make sure that we go beyond just educating the public, but providing them the tools to make sure they can keep their homes and their neighborhoods safer.
And look, one of the things we also know is that Black and Brown communities are often also on the front lines, and gun violence disproportionately impacts those communities. As someone who has led as governor an increasingly diverse state, how can we help those communities stay safe right now?
Well, there's a real sense of urgency that we need to make some of these gun safety initiatives, put them into regulation statute as quickly as possible. I think red flag laws, we've passed red flag laws last year in Colorado to make sure that when someone's going through a crisis in some way, that we make sure they don't have access to firearms and not just put others at risk, but put themselves at risk. And I think when you look at the inner city, and especially people of color, they have been terrorized, and I don't use that word lightly, but for generations by a tolerance for gun violence. In many cities, we're using sophisticated technical uh, innovations. You've seen ShotSpotter and some of the tools that allow local authorities to find out where gunshots are fired in cities in real time and make sure that they get uh, uh, law enforcement officers there as quickly as possible and and begin to change that sense of culture that, I mean, it's not okay to be firing uh, handguns in cities or anywhere cities. And yet for a long time it was accepted as part of the culture, the violent culture. I think being able to respond in real time and changing the culture of how about firearms in our schools and in our churches going to go a long way. But we also need those innovations within local government.
Um, as Congresswoman Macbeth mentioned, we're all waiting for the Senate to take action. In fact, in the first few months of the new House, H.R. 8, which was the universal background check bill, was passed and passed on a bipartisan basis. Sadly, we know that even though the support is probably there in the Senate, Mitch McConnell has refused to actually put on the floor any gun safety measures. Once you get to the Senate, and we know you will, how do you think the Senate Democrats and Republicans need to go forward to try to place pressure on Mitch McConnell?
Well, the best way to put pressure on Mitch McConnell is to make sure he's not the majority leader. And there are a number of Senate candidates in North Carolina, in Maine, Iowa, Arizona, my friend Governor Bullock up in Montana. There are a number of campaigns where we've got a good chance of displacing the incumbent Republicans and taking Mitch McConnell out of that majority seat where he has, he's kept the country in a stranglehold. And gun safety is a classic example. There, by most people's estimate, there's somewhere between 66 and 70 votes in the Senate to pass universal background checks, not to mention some of these other common sense gun safety initiatives. We've got to get him out of that seat. Even if he stays there, if somehow we don't get the majority, which, for me is almost unthinkable. And I will tell you, this is the one campaign in my life. If I don't win this, I will never forgive myself. And I am working 70 and 80 and 90 hours a week to make sure that doesn't happen, to make sure that I do win. I think even if Mitch McConnell maintains his position as a majority leader, we still have to work to go and find the moderate, reasonable Republicans on the other side and begin building that bridge. But I don't think Mitch McConnell, as long as he's in power, is ever going to let even something as basic as universal background checks get to the floor of the Senate. He's demonstrated again and again that those financial contributions from the NRA are more valuable than protecting the people of America.
Governor, thank you for joining us on this Zoom call today. We hope the next time we get together will be in Washington, D.C. And now I'm going to turn it over to Shannon for closing remarks.
Thank you so much. Thank you, Governor Hickenlooper, for joining and for your insights. And what I'd like to ask everyone now on this call to do is to visit gunsensevoter.org and take our special pledge to vote for gun sense candidates, and then call or text 10 of your friends and ask them to do the same. Again, head to gunsensevoter.org and make the pledge to vote. So many of our lives have been upended by the coronavirus epidemic. But I also want to remind everyone that this movement started online, and we can and will win in a virtual world. Our grassroots army has always been made up of women who balance life-saving advocacy with taking care of their families and advancing their careers. Grounding ourselves in this work can help us weather the pandemic and tackle America's gun violence epidemic. You, grassroots volunteers with Moms Demand Action and Students Demand Action, and all 500 and more of you on this call today, you will be the reason that we elect a gun sense president in 2020. We take back the U.S. Senate, and we elect new gun sense champions at the state and local levels. And that work begins right now, today. Thank you so much, everyone, for joining us. Representatives, Governor, John, thank you so much. And to all of our volunteers, we really are grateful for your time.